Hi, I'm Bob Schoolcraft, pastor at Friendship United Methodist Church, Punta Gorda, Florida. I'd like to welcome you on this 31st day of October 2021. This Sunday, we're recognizing All Saints' Day, and I have my reason for doing that. We're recognizing All Saints' Day, and we remember those who have served God, and they served, and now they enjoy His company in heaven. We rejoice in that. And it's not a day of sorrow, but a day of gladness, for we know that because Christ lives, we also will live. We shall share the company of all those who are part of the family of Christ. And what a day of rejoicing that will be. And we remember the words of St. Paul when he instructed the church at Thessalonica with these words: "Brothers and sisters, we do not want you to be uninformed about those who sleep in death, so that you do not grieve like the rest of mankind, who have no hope. For we believe that Jesus died and rose again, and so we believe that God will bring with Jesus those who have fallen asleep with him." 1 Thessalonians 4:13 and 14. Now notice that St. Paul is not telling these believers that Christians do not grieve. Rather, he is telling them not to grieve like the rest of mankind, because there is no hope. Philip Yancey, in his book, The Jesus I Never Knew, tells that there are Christians from a certain part of Africa who never say of their dead that they have lost that person like some of us may say. "I lost my wife last spring." That's seeing death from our perspective. But these African folks view death from God's perspective. Instead, they announce with joy that their loved ones have arrived in heaven. Wow, that's not lost at all. They know exactly where they are. They're in heaven with God. Do not grieve like those who have no hope. Woody Allen, who made a successful career out of the fear of death, was once asked if he hoped to live on forever on the silver screen. And Woody answered, "I'd rather live on in my apartment." And he went on to add that, "I don't want to achieve immortality through my work. I want to achieve it by not dying." Well, good luck, Woody. It's not going to happen. I hate to tell you that. But today we're going to visit with three of Jesus' closest friends, Lazarus and his sister Martha and Mary. And Jesus spent time in their home. Often he would stop and visit with Mary and Martha and Lazarus. Whenever he passed through their community, he'd stop by. They had shared many enjoyable evenings together, and Jesus was teaching one day a couple of miles from Bethany, where Mary, Martha, and Lazarus resided, when word came to him that Lazarus was sick and would probably die. And "Look, Lord, he whom you love is ill." And certainly Jesus would come when he heard that his friend was sick, and Jesus was Lazarus' last hope. Jesus had healed other people from their illnesses. Surely he would come and heal his friend. He would be running to get there. But as you know, that's not exactly the way things worked out. Instead of going at once to Lazarus, Jesus stayed where he was for 2 more days. And what doesn't make sense is that Jesus was only a couple of miles away from where Mary and Martha's house. He could have made the trip in a very short time, and instead he purposely stayed where he was for 2 more days. Now, how would you feel if you or a loved one went to the emergency room at the hospital and had to wait 48 hours for the doctor to show up and treat you, even if he was just not that far away? You would be outraged. If a loved one died while waiting those 2 days for the doctor, we'd not only be outraged, we'd probably want to sue the hospital. We're given a clue, though, that something extraordinary is about to take place. We read that when Jesus heard that Lazarus was ill, he said, "This sickness will not end in death. No, it is for God's glory, so that God's Son may be glorified through him." What did he mean by that? He meant something magnificent, as we know. Not Mary and Martha, but as we know it today. By the time Jesus finally made his way to the home of Mary and Martha, their brother was already dead. And when Martha heard that Jesus was approaching, she went running out to meet him. And I can just see the redness in her face, the anger. Her first words were, "Lord, if you had been here, my brother would not have died." And I can't imagine she said that very politely. And that's quite a statement of faith, though, for Martha to make. Jesus assured her, "Your brother will rise again." And Martha agreed with Jesus, thinking Jesus meant that Lazarus would rise on the last day. And Jesus replied, "I am the resurrection and the life. Those who believe in me, even though they die, they will live." Jesus asked if Martha, "Do you believe her? Do you believe this?" And Martha replied, "Yes, Lord." However, Martha went back home, apparently not expecting anything to come from her conversation with Jesus. And I imagine she just shuffled her way back home. And Martha told her sister Mary that the teacher is here and he's calling for you. And Mary got up at once and she ran out of the house to meet Jesus. And Mary found Jesus at the same place where Martha had left him. She knelt at his feet and repeated what her sister had said. "Lord, if you had been here, my brother would not have died." Mary was grieving uncontrollably over her brother's death, but she fell at his feet and worshiped, but she said that, and it hurt, And the people who followed her, when they followed her out to meet Jesus, they began weeping and wailing. And here we have one of the most beautiful scenes in all of the Scriptures. Jesus tells us, or John tells us, that when Jesus saw her weeping, and the Jews who had come along with her also weeping, he was deeply moved in spirit and troubled. "Where have you laid him?" he asked. "Come and see, Lord," they replied. And John replies, "Jesus wept." Then the Jews said, "See how he loved him?" We all know that Jesus wept is the shortest verse in the Bible, but do you understand that this is also one of the most powerful verses in the Bible? Tom Wright, in his Bible study guide, John for Every Man, asks the question, why does John show us a weeping Jesus? It's a good question. However, I believe most people are greatly impressed by a weeping Jesus. We may have snickered as children when we were asked to recite a Bible verse and would say Jesus wept, but simply because it was the shortest verse in the Bible. But as I've aged, I believe most of us have learned to prize that little verse. First of all, it shows the human side of Jesus. Jesus was fully human and fully divine. Weeping showed that side of Jesus so that those of us who have hurt so badly at some time in our lives, so that our tears also flowed, could identify with him. He knows where we are. He has been there. Anyone who has ever hurt knows what it is to cry. Unless we're one of those sad people that who have learned to smother any show of emotion. And this is a very unhealthy practice when we do that. Joanne Wallace, in her book, The Image of Loneliness, tells about a lady in class who she was teaching who had been married for 30 years. As a child, she had been taught big girls don't cry. Subsequently, she had never shed a single tear. And this had turned her into a woman who came across to others as a visibly harsh person. She scarcely ever talked to anyone, and consequently she had very few friends. When Wallace pointed out in class that crying is not a weakness, this woman began at certain times to let tears form in the corner of her eye. And then they began to flow. Wallace notes that she is now developing a genuine softness that is much more appealing than her stoic reserve. And that's important. Tears are a natural, healthy response to a deep hurt. Of course, people weep for different reasons. In the period following the fall of the apartheid in South Africa, the first president of the new South Africa, Nelson Mandela, appointed a Truth and Reconciliation Committee. The commission's task was to work toward the healing of the wounds of the South African people. Bishop Desmond Tutu, an archbishop in the Anglican Church, was named to head the commission. Public hearings were held at which victims told their stories of injustice and persecution while the nation watched and listened on national TV. At one point, after a particular painful testimony by a man who had suffered horrible pain and injustice, Bishop Desmond Tutu broke down in tears and began to cry, live, in color, for the whole nation to see, sobbing. And later someone said, I believe it was in those tears of that religious leader that the nation began to heal. Don't you suppose that it was healing for some witnesses in the crowd mourning Lazarus' death when they saw Jesus break down and cry? See how he loved him, they said. And Jesus did love Lazarus, just as he loves you and me. His tears are a reminder of the human side of the Master and his love for all of God's children. Jesus' tears not only help us relate to him, but it shows how he is able to relate to our experience when we lose someone we care about. It hurts when we stand by the grave of someone we love. Dr. Robert Bowman tells a story that comes from a nurse in a cancer ward, and her name was Nan Pinkston. Nan's story is about a young woman named Rebecca who was admitted to her ward. Only 32 years old and with eyes that sparkled and a ponytail that bounced as she talked, and Rebecca had been diagnosed with 2 weeks earlier with breast cancer. She was accompanied to the hospital by her husband, Warren, and her 3 daughters, Ruthie, age 6, Hannah, age 4, and Molly, age 2. And when they were finally alone, Nurse Pinkston explained to Rebecca that she needed to place a needle in her arm to give her the prescribed chemotherapy. And it was then that Rebecca confessed that she was terrified of needles, but she would allow the nurse to inject her because she needed to live for her girls. When the kindly nurse began to inject the dreaded needle, Rebecca began reciting, "The Lord is my shepherd, I shall not want." And afterward, Rebecca asked Nurse Pinkston what her favorite Bible verse was. John 11:35, she replied, "Jesus wept." And Rebecca was surprised. It seemed such a sad verse. And Nurse Pinkston explained that it comforted her to know that Jesus is sad when bad things happen to his people. It also demonstrates the human side of Jesus, and she said that helps her when she cares for the sick people that come in. 18 months later, it was evident that treatments Rebecca was receiving were insufficient to stop the advance of this dreaded disease of cancer. And one day, Nurse Pinkston entered Rebecca's room and found it cluttered with paper and audio tapes and a tape recorder. And Rebecca explained that the tapes were for her 3 daughters. She wanted to share with them some words of wisdom to help them deal with her death. She wanted them to know how much she loved them. She explained to them that she was going to live with God and help him get a home ready for them when they were very old and they would see her again. And then the end got very close, and Rebecca asked Nurse Pinkston to help her make one last audio tape. And she said it was the most important tape of all. On this tape, the dying young mother spoke her last words to her daughters, whom she loved very, very much. She explained to them that one day their daddy would bring home a new mommy. And she told them to make their new mommy feel very special. Most important, hug her very often. And she said she hoped they would not be sad for long. And then she closed with these words, "Jesus cried." Jesus wept. He knows how sad you are, and he knows you will be happy again. I love you so much, Hannah, Ruthie, and Molly. Big hugs from your first mommy. Rebecca died 2 days later. And Rebecca was right. Jesus' tears not only show us his human side, but also tell us that Jesus knows how sad we are when we lose someone we love. That's a good thing to remember as we celebrate All Saints' Day. We grieve for them, but not as those who have no hope. We know where they are. We haven't lost them. We're going to see them again. We simply await that day when we will be reunited with them in our eternal home, where they have prepared, along with Jesus, a place for us and will greet us with open, loving arms.